Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nemeth Report podcast. I'm Dr. Tammy Nemeth, energy historian consultant, and I'll be your host. Today, it's my absolute pleasure to be joined by Brendan Long, a sell side equity research analyst covering the energy sector. We're going to be talking about Brendan's new book, and it's called Energy Shocks: The Shocking Reality of Energy, Carbon Dioxide, and the Failure of the Green Transition. I have it right here. It's available on Amazon. People should check it out. It's fantastic. Hi, Brendan. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Tammy. Bless you. Thank you for having me.
You have quite an interesting background, and I'm wondering if you can just take a moment to introduce yourself to the audience and tell us about yourself.
Sure, my pleasure. So, my background is in energy. I have over 20 years covering the energy sector globally, and I've got a somewhat unique background in that I've covered the breadth of energy, almost everything you could possibly wish to cover, from traditional gas projects, natural gas, to the renewable energy, hydrogen, etc. So I thought, I thought I was somewhat uniquely positioned um, to understand the bigger picture, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book.
That's great. I know that you grew up in Western Canada. I think you're from the Calgary area, and you have a passion for nature and wildlife. How did that background shape your decision to write Energy Shocks?
Well, it's been fascinating to, I mean, Energy Shocks looks at the big picture from the broadest perspective possible. So it covers energy, the science of carbon dioxide, and we've got 20 essays related to how energy affects us very broadly. Um, Energy and the politics of carbon dioxide affect how they affect us very broadly. And the one issue that is just completely missing from the topic of the energy transition is farming. And farming is the basis of human civilization. And far efficient, I'll get long winding road to answer your question, but efficient farming and high agricultural yields are kind of associated with so much that is beneficial for the human species. And in relation to this, I personally have had an interest in wildlife conservation for a long period of time. And I've been frustrated, very frustrated, that all of these environmental proponents have been focusing uniquely on carbon dioxide emissions. And anybody who has got any background in wildlife conservation is worried about habitat.
Yeah.
Habitat is how where animals live. It's where they get their food. And so, coming from Western Canada, we've grew up in this in this bounteous land of wonderful wildlife. And so it is something that we wish to preserve. And how do you preserve it? The number one thing is to focus on habitat, and this is what recognized by any conservationist. And it's a bit, I found it very deceitful and unhelpful for wildlife that whole narrative has been, or that the environmentalism has been hijacked by the CO2 is evil agenda, which has done a great disservice to wildlife, because it's reduced is reduced to agricultural yields, which means you need more land to get your food. So you look to Africa, wildlife is being absolutely decimated. And I use in my book the example, the elephant population is down. There's one elephant alive today relative to 100 years ago. It's really scandalous, and that will continue for as long as we ignore the importance of agricultural yield. So it's been a great scandal that we've ignored that in this discussion of the energy transition. And looking beyond this, I mean, you look at the deforestation of forests in British Columbia to provide wood pellets to feed the green energy furnaces in Europe. I mean, it's an absolute outrage. It's just beyond deceit. And then you look at what's happening in Southeast Asia, and these beautiful tropical rainforests are being torn down, and this is being subsidized by the European Union so that we can procure biodiesel, which is another word for palm oil. It's absolutely an outrage, and so enough is enough. It's kind of high time that we reframe the narrative and start focusing on what matters for wildlife.
That's a great point, and there's two issues that I'd like to sort of tie into that. But the first one, with respect to the farming, I had a conversation yesterday with Robert Bryce, and he was talking about, he had this great term for wind and solar. He calls it energy sprawl, because when you talk about habitat, if you have a coal-fired plant or you've got a natural gas combined cycle plant, it takes up a relatively small space when you compare it to the amount of electricity that it generates, with compared with wind arrays, solar arrays, taking up lots of land and encroaching on habitats, affecting migration patterns, affecting how wildlife lives around those installations. And I think of here in the UK, you're in the UK, I'm in the UK, and how there's this push now to take farmland, good farmland, out of production and put solar and wind installations on it. And not only that, to then they want to take away 9% of current agricultural land under production, and ostensibly to support biodiversity, put flowers and various other things, and rewild waterways, which would be in some places quite a disaster. So there's these other environmental implications for what has been embraced as part of the net zero transition, which feeds into what you're talking about, food production. And then the other element I would link it to is with the European Union and their farm to fork strategy, where they wish to get rid of using hydrocarbons in any way in farming and have 50% of agricultural production in the EU be organic by 2050. You cannot feed the population from organic farming. And so there's these contradictions, which I'm sure we'll talk about with the transition with respect to, as you discussed in the book, how they want to have these things, they label it clean and whatnot, but the reality is something different. And so then the second point I just want to tie this to is, like, at the beginning of your book, if I go right back to the beginning to the dedication, you talk about Chris Wright and the Texas governor Greg Abbott. So what inspired that dedication, and how does it sort of connect to your goal of dispelling misunderstandings about energy and carbon dioxide?
Well, Chris Wright has been an absolute legend in educating people on how energy really works. And he's got the breadth of understanding that is somewhat unique. He's a scientist, he's an energy expert, and he has the courage, like yourself, he has had the courage to go out and to smash the false negative, the deceitful negative on the head and say, that's not truthful. And that, combined with his dedication to educating the public, has been just hugely beneficial to me, as well as what you have done, and others, to have kind of stood up against this deceit. And so it was just a way of saying thank you. I've benefited hugely from your help, and that goes really for all of the people who I've cited in my book, of which you are one, because without those leaders, you can't do it. You need the information and the courage so that you can follow them. And Greg Abbott, bless him, he's been. I mean, there's something about Texas, that these people, they stand up for what's right, and they have, in the way of ESG, which is just an acronym which doesn't particularly mean anything, but the purpose of it is to channel as much wealth as possible into green energy projects. And he stood up and said, "No, that's wrong. That's that's it's deceiving the public. It's not the Texan or the American way, and it's very, very detrimental because it's basically, instead of capitalism is about creating wealth, the ESG finance is about lowering the cost, lowering the required rate of return on green energy projects. So this stuff can somehow make sense through financial engineering, even though the returns on this are fundamentally, the economic returns on green energy are very, very low. So it's ESG is a great way of impoverishing your civilization. So
Yeah.
what Greg Abbott has done with the support of the legislature in Texas, and with the support of the Texan people, bless them, he said, "No, enough. We're going to make this. This is a fraud. We are going to make it illegal for our state to fund this." So he's basically made a line in the sand, a decision in principle, and it was very, very important that he did that, because it said you can fight back against this great machine, all of this UN machinery and all of these powers, and you can stand up for what is fundamentally truthful. Since he's done that, 14 governors have similarly passed anti-ESG legislation, and it's just been a huge inspiration for me. Sat in London, where I just see, gosh, we really need this hope, because we really need people like that, fighters who are get stuck in, to fight for what's right. Otherwise, it's tyranny, it's the coercion, it's manipulation of the way that we think, and the worst is it's all fundamentally deceitful, and is premised on bad faith. So I'm so grateful for him, and that is the reason for which I was pleased to thank him in my book.
Well, you make an interesting point in your book about that linguistic inversion when it comes to the language that's used to talk about climate change and the net zero transition. And to me that's really important because like you say, if they're being honest about what the goal is and what it's going to do, people wouldn't buy into it. And so there's this, as you point out, there's this deceitfulness, this bad faith in how the language is used to talk about climate change and net zero. And you highlight certain terms like how there's carbon pollution and dirty energy versus clean energy or renewable energy. There's green and then there's brown, as if there's this sort of linguistic play going on in order to signal to people what's appropriate, what they should be celebrating, and what is negative that they should be rejecting. And I wonder if you could maybe elaborate a little more on that idea about this linguistic inversion that's taking place.
Well, I'm so glad you brought it up, and it'd be unfair for me not to mention Chris Wright again, because he is the fellow he's an engineer, but he's the fellow who really figured out this is about psychology, this is about language, and what I can say is that the green energy people, the institution behind this is they're very bad at producing energy. They produce. I mean, they cause we put in. It is the worst investment in the history of humanity. Green energy. We're paying $2 trillion into this. We're getting 3% of global energy as they calculate it, which is it's supplied in the way of intermittent electricity, the lowest value form of energy imaginable. So they're absolutely horrible at the day job, so to speak, which is providing energy, but they are exceptionally good. And the real play, where they're focused and where the green energy where the ecosystem is really expert is in their public relations and media ecosystem, and the way that they have manipulated our thoughts using language so that we over time have been gaslit in a way that's just, it's hard to fathom unless you take a step back and realize, oh goodness. And a lot of this is linguistic inversion. So renewable energy is, as a word, it's just a creation. It doesn't mean this stuff is renewable. You need coal mines galore and steel galore to build a wind turbine. They don't last particularly long. Hardly 20 years. They are the blades cannot be recycled. How
Yeah.
is this renewable? You've got to start from scratch every 20 years. All of that all of the mines, they're completely existentially reliant on fossil fuels. And yet somehow, how is it that we've been able to believe that this is renewable energy? And it's so, Chris Wright really opened my eyes to, goodness, look at the way they've used language, and look at how ag- aggressively, and look at how clever and how predatory they have been in the media and PR ecosystem. I mean, in our newspapers,
Yeah.
you've got the governments very much aligned with promoting this agenda, so it's coming at you everywhere, and it's all just fundamentally wrong, and the inverse of what it actually is. And so it's yeah, it was a credit to Chris Wright again for opening my eyes to that.
Well, you mentioned a topic that I've spent a lot of time researching, and that's the ESG sphere, the environmental social governance metrics, and I would say investment distortions. And what's interesting, as I was watching uh, a a panel at a conference in Beijing last year, and Mark Carney was on that panel. Um, Philip Hildebrand, who's the vice chairman of BlackRock, and Governor Joe, who used to be the Bank of China governor. And they were talking about how to ramp up the investment in green energy globally. And one of the interesting things Mark Carney said was that essentially they need to have a way to prop up these companies that can only really survive with subsidies, or if they're the only game in town. And they need to be propped up with private investment, philanthropic investment, and regulation until they can get rid of the competition. And so do you see with there's been the pushback with the ESG metrics, and I'm so glad that you mentioned what Governor Abbott and the other Republican um, governors have been doing to push back on it. There was also, I'll just throw in here, the House Judiciary Committee last year held hearings on what they called the climate cartel that was manipulating investors and shareholders to try and push the hydrocarbon companies, particularly Exxon was the case study, out of business, or to push them into directions they didn't really want to go. That wasn't part of their fiduciary duty. And they produced two studies out of this, one in June and one that was released just before Christmas in December. And I think the second one was called shakedown, stakeholder shakedown, or something like that, or climate shakedown. But it was really interesting because they interviewed Mark Carney, and he talked about how these metrics were so important in order to shift investment, and that it was super important that investors knew what companies were doing so they could shift investment away from it. But you know, is that is that what investors ought to be doing in following this way? And
No,
so
I
do you
mean,
see a way for governments to step back? Is it possible? Can markets drive energy solutions if the investors in the so-called markets are being pressured to follow this ESG course?
the ESG course is on the global stage. This is criminal. I mean, people are hungry. People are dying. Um, the lights and the respiratory machines in hospitals in South Africa are failing to operate because of this agenda. So it's causing a human tragedy. Mark Carney has been he's looking at London. London is almost untouchable today from a financial perspective. It's like it has rabies or something. Money is allergic to it. And the ESG regulations that he put in place at the Bank of England, that he bullied through, have made London crash out of the leaderboard of financial centers. I mean, it's a massive concern. It's no longer it's barely in the top 20 in terms of money, London, in terms of monies raised via IPOs. So, and a lot of that, you look at the companies that are they're delisting from London and thinking about moving elsewhere. Major corporations,
Yeah.
Depending on when you look, Shell is the number one company by market capitalization on the London Stock Exchange. It is seriously contemplating making its main place of listing the New York Stock Exchange because of this ESG culture and regulatory background that Mark Carney has pushed on London. So it's not working. And I would also say it's been an absolute. It is so deceitful to say that the green energy had ever any intention or capacity to displace fossil fuels. It's just a complete nonsense. For one thing, all of the green energy is produced, wind turbines, solar. All of this is coming from the steel is coming from China. It's like 80% of our solar panels are coming from China, which is all coal based manufacturing. The steel for wind turbines is entirely from made necessarily by way of coal. But more than this, the system of how energy works is the system chosen to promote wind and solar is not consistent with the displacement of reliable forms of energy. So if you want to have a 100% wind solar system, the inventor of wind was a Scottish professor of wind to electricity, who had a battery system. So he had a wind turbine plus a battery. He was able to keep the lights in his cabin on in the late 1900s. That system works. It is a coherent, legitimate system. It's exceptionally costly and therefore theoretical, but not. It doesn't work, and you cannot run an industry based on this type of system. So, but if we wanted to displace reliable or fossil fuels in our energy mix, and this is simply electricity, which is about 1/5 of energy. If we wanted to do it for that 1/5 component, then you need to have the system of this professor, which is electric batteries. So from the very beginning, it has been we've not adopted that system because it's too expensive. We've adopted the grid-based system, which means that when solar power and wind power are not working, we go back to what we can rely upon. So these fossil fuels and nuclear are the backbone of the system. And so when Carney says we're going to get rid of fossil fuels, it is just it's completely deceitful nonsense. There's no intention and no capacity for this to happen. And you can see in practice big picture, 2 trillion, more than 2/3 of our investment in energy now is channeled into green energy.
Yeah.
And yet green energy is not even capable of keeping up with growth in demand for energy. Hence why we have record demand for coal, oil, and natural gas in 2024. So to speak in terms of we're going to displace fossil fuels it's a nonsense. It's a lie. It's deceitful. It's premised on bad faith. You cannot be you cannot do any coherent analysis of this and come to the conclusion that you can displace fossil fuels. And it's exceptionally dangerous to promote that narrative, because where the pockets of the world where we are aggressively promoting that, you're seeing just human suffering on an unprecedented scale. Look at South Africa. I mean,
Yeah.
and this is all, I mean, I'm so grateful for you and others who've been pushing back on this, because it's we're now it's saving people's lives, and it has been against a system where it's been the International Energy Agency, the United Nations, U.S. government, UK government, most energy consultants, because they're getting paid so much
Yeah.
money to say this, and the human costs are just devastating. And Carney is just an absolute predator. He doesn't care. He has no empathy with the devastation that that he's causing to people around the world. It's just so it's entirely deceitful. And yeah, it's good news. It's really coming to an end, and it necessarily needed to come to an end, because you can only push water up a hill so long. So it's
Well, so I think it's coming to an end in certain places, or at least it seems to be heading in that trajectory. But as you know, since we're in the UK, um, you argue in the book, and I agree, that they're reversing the Industrial Revolution, that we're going into this set of the UK is regressive energy policies where they revert to wood in some cases, and you discuss the Drax wood burning facility. They're, they were bragging about how they shut down the last coal plant back in October. They're going to be shutting down two nuclear powered plants in the next few years. The plans to replace them are, I mean, the approval process here is ridiculous. So who knows when they're going to actually have another nuclear power plant built. So you have the UK deindustrializing, which is one of the only reasons why they were able to say that they've reduced their emissions or whatever. So they've lost their steel production. There's these geopolitical risks now, fossil fuel imports, because they've shut down the North Sea, or trying to anyway, which is ridiculous. So, what lessons should other nations take from the UK and their regressive energy policies, if we don't wish to have the same mistakes where our energy bills are incredibly expensive, highest energy prices, electricity prices for industry in the world is here in the UK. So, what lessons can people take away to not make these mistakes?
Well, I think that I think the world, generally speaking, has a much better picture of what's happening within the UK than the UK itself has. And back to the control and how excellent the PR media ecosystem has been to shape our thinking on this. This is coming from the UK. London is the epicenter of this. So people in the UK have been hit harder and more broadly by this. So I mean, the lesson is, I mean, be very careful of don't get caught up in this, because what's happening is, as it's the lesson for outside observers is to appreciate the extent to which the human mind can be gaslit and controlled. I mean, because you look at this situation, you've got more than 1 in 10 nurses surviving in food banks in the UK. Same for police.
Yeah.
You've got the country is completely deindustrialized. It is not. It is much poorer than it has ever been. It's losing its standing in Western civilization, and yet the energy transition to this day is presented to the people of the UK as an opportunity.
Yeah.
We're going to be the leaders of the future, and that's really the fear. It's more of a lesson on pushing back on the media, the tyranny of a political media establishment that is gutting knowingly gutting it's the people within its own country for selfish, deceitful gain. There's no chance that the energy transition will work in the UK. It's still 77% reliant on fossil fuels. It's destroying habitat like you wouldn't believe. Like, as we've said, our forests in Canada are being destroyed to provide energy to displace coal. So it's a tragedy, and the UK. I don't know. We'll see what will happen. It's unsustainable. It will break. That can take many different forms. That can mean it can become insolvent, and it can no longer, financial breakdown. That's a very conceivable end game to the energy transition in the UK. I don't, as a step, I mean, there's zero chance that the UK alone has the power to maintain this political media ecosystem that has been controlling our minds for decades. So, I mean, this is all, it was US based. The US has got the money. The US controls the International Energy Agency. The US does, and when they start controlling the United Nations and working in tandem with the European Union, combined, they do have they have had the media power, to in a predatory, coercive way, control the way we think about things, make us very scared of carbon dioxide, and to convince us that the energy transition is an opportunity. The UK is not close to having the power to doing this alone. And it's important to appreciate that India, China, these guys are leading. They're on the leading edge of climate science. They're not going to be bullied into, the UK is nowhere near the top in climate science, but so the US is now aligned with the growth countries of the world in terms of, is carbon dioxide good or bad? And so they are. That means that the outliers, the European Union, which is going through tremendous change politically, and there's a lot of political resentment for this top-down climate agenda, and in the UK, these outliers, they don't have the power to shape the new world. They're up against the massive. You've got, the developing world is that's the mass of humanity.
Yeah.
You put the US on side with them politically in terms of, the climate agenda and the energy transition agenda. It's just unbeatable force. So the wisest thing for the UK to do would be to appreciate that. But we'll see. But it can take. The other thing is, from a industrial perspective, the UK has simply gutted all of its steel towns, all of these communities, just destroyed.
Yeah.
It has got, and it's replaced that with services, the services sector, which is so in that is not compatible with the UK's ambition to be a military power. That is not compatible. I mean, Russia is so aware of the UK's weaknesses. It's shocking that the UK has the audacity to present itself as posing a credible deterrent to Russia when it has no industrial base. It's importing steel. It's got
Yeah.
no chance of being a credible NATO ally. So these other factors may also come to bear. It's I mean, it's in. We live in the UK, so we are very focused on the UK. The reality is, the UK produces less than 1% of global carbon dioxide, less than 1% of crude oil production. It's effectively losing its standing and place in the world. And whether it wants to reestablish its rightful place in the world is up to us, the people in the UK. But if not, the world moves on. That's
Right.
the
Yeah.
stark reality.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, one of the interesting things about the UK, I think, is that there's been this problem of the uniparty over, I would say, the past 13 years, where they all agree on the same thing about climate. And that's been the problem. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Conservative Party got decimated in the last election because people wanted to vote for something else. And they're like, well, who do we vote for? Because conservatives aren't doing what we want. We think net zero is stupid. And I think that's one of the reasons why reform picked up so many seats. But um,
I
one of
agree
your
with you.
yeah, one of your boldest claims, and I'll tie this into CO2 and carbon dioxide is that carbon dioxide between 2016 and 2019, there has been these satellites that have been monitoring, and it's been shown to actually that it's fertilized um, Earth, and it's increased by 2.3%. If I have the stat right from your book, Earth's green area per decade. So why do you think this satellite data has not shifted the whole global warming CO2 is evil paradigm?
It's a great question, and I mean the investment in this, which started from the 90s, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change established its dogma as to how the climate works, how carbon dioxide works, and they have invested so much politically in this dogma. The European Commission has, I mean, they have not invested politically in a project as heavily as they have in the energy transition since the euro. So there is just, and science changes with the facts. I mean, that's if you've got new facts, scientific method means like, okay, well, you've got to then reassess your conclusions. So all of this, for viewers who aren't that familiar with climate science, I'll try to be as simple as I can with it. It's basically back in the 1990s, they said, okay, we think we have this relationship between carbon dioxide and the earth warming. And so, but they knew that carbon dioxide on its own did not have the physical properties to increase the temperature of the earth by as much as they esteemed was happening. So there was something else at play, and they determined that it was water vapor. And so the dogma is the carbon dioxide kickstarts a warming process that then increases the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. And then that is what causes the water vapor causes 75% of the global warming. And also, we're all going to die. It's going to be a catastrophe tomorrow. It's happening if we don't fix it. So carbon dioxide is evil pursuant to this dogma. I mean, it's opened the gates of hell is
Yeah.
the language that they use. Joe Biden says it's more dangerous than nuclear war. So this is the type of and fundamentally back to language and psychology. Forget about the science. Nobody. It's what people the takeaways, what people believe, and just and so it's kind of all the science has all been. Nobody understands the science. I'm really amazed at even on the people who are progressing the climate alarmist agenda. It's all been contracted to carbon dioxide is more dangerous than nuclear war.
Yeah.
So in any case, if you go, but and there was so it's basically the science was created by physicists, and it was a precondition for this model was that there's no regional carbon dioxide fertilization effect. So that's the basis of the dogma. Then that dogma is then put into a computer models. Many of them, they take the average of those models. That is the science of global warming. My book goes into it in far greater detail, but that's the general gist of it, which I think across the board everybody will agree on. That is a non is confrontational, or that's just the facts. Uh,
Yeah.
and then so what's happened is we've since 1990s satellites were not in orbit long enough to appreciate how the Earth is actually changing. Today, we've had decades of satellites being in orbit, so we can see, okay, this is how the world is actually changing. And lo and behold, as you say, over 2% greening, over 2% forest growth, expansion, net of losses per decade. It is just mind-boggling. I mean, if you think of this on a, it's just the land mass that is becoming green, the land mass that is becoming newly forested is just, it is staggering, and you would never believe it without satellite data. No one, I wouldn't believe it. It's you can only believe it because you have direct line of sight evidence from satellites that this is actually happening. So it's like, oh, okay, well, this then all of a sudden the whole premise of the climate model, which is basically created by physicists, is a bit, well, this is like, well, there's its whole biological effect. You can't just
Yeah.
simply ignore it. And one of the reasons why it has been ignored is because it's not a subtle little, oh, well, just, you know, tweak it. It's like, no, you've got to start from scratch. You've got to recognize that you are wrong in a complete sense, and then rethink things through. Um, Meanwhile, you've had on earth sciences over the last decades, like so many other areas of knowledge, there's just been an explosion of what we know. And you tie this into the new awareness of how much water that trees emit to humidify the atmosphere. It is astounding. The rivers of the world, we thought that's how water vapor got out of the forest. No, it's the rivers in the air, in the atmosphere, that really that are the real means by which water vapor is leaving the forest. Effectively, forests make their own rain, which we didn't know that. Um, so now you've got this, oh goodness, you start looking at the big picture here, and it's like, well, the climate model, there we go.
Yeah,
It's
you
like,
have that great picture in the
oh.
book of the moisture just emanating from the forests.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. A picture speaks a thousand words, and exactly right. And so you've got this. So all of a sudden, it's like, oh, so it's an embarrassment. It is like an absolute embarrassment, and it's so funny because for people who follow the world of the climate scientists, everybody's in a panic because everybody can see this. What are we going to do? This isn't a backpedal. This is a admission that the whole thing is been premised on deceit and bad faith, and then it's okay, and then you ignore this data for decades, getting on a decade now, and it's like, okay, well then how do you even come back from that? You can't. So it won't. My suspicion is that it won't be debated in by way of science. That's over. It is political. They've been
Yeah.
deceitful. They've been wrong. It'll be politics and power that just says, this is, get out. You're liars. You're crooks. You're causing harm to the world. You're not acting in good faith. You've ignored data for decades. We're not funding you anymore. Basically, the whole ecosystem that's been promoting that, it's all part of the PR media ecosystem that's been scaring the wits out of us, for decades, and that whole house of cards, as well as the energy transition house of cards, is collapsing before our eyes. Thank goodness.
Right, right. And what's interesting is that I think you make a really great point that a lot of these politicians have sort of hitched their careers to this narrative about climate change, and this is how they were going to sort of control the economies and alter the financial and the global financial and economic system that's more amenable to whatever their progressive sensibilities are. And earlier you said the United States was supporting this and whatever. I would say it was the progressive movement in the United States, which is why, with the change in government, when you have people like Donald Trump and the people he has around him, like Chris Wright, who is now the Secretary of Energy, and Doug Burgum, who's the Interior Minister, or Secretary. you know, so that there's this progressive movement that is pushing this certain agenda and whatever. And the Europeans had an opportunity when Russia attacked Ukraine to say, you know what, I think maybe we've been wrong. We don't have the reliable energy. Maybe it was a bad idea to be outsourcing our steel production and all of the and our industrial production and so on. And so they had an opportunity. There was an out to save face, but instead of doing that, they doubled down and decided, you know what, we're gonna we're gonna push for the transition even harder, and we're gonna wrap it in the language of energy security. Like if I have to hear Ed Miliband say one more time that building wind and solar instead of developing the North Sea, well, or even doing fracking in the Midlands where there's loads of natural gas, that in order to be more energy secure, we have to build wind and solar. I think I'm going to be sick. But when they realized they could have used that as an out to change course, but they didn't. They're doubling down, and so I don't know what will happen. I feel like they almost need in the UK and the EU they have to hit the wall
I
before, and that's just a terrible thing. So I just kind of want to go back a little bit to what you were saying about farming, because I think farming and habitat is a really crucial element. I know we talked a little bit about it already, but I want to just point out that in your book you make this great point that if people wanted true carbon neutrality in food production, which is what net zero talks about, we're going to be carbon neutral, whatever. And I'm going to quote you here because I wrote it down. You said, this would require humanity to live as pre agricultural hunter gatherers, end quote. And I just think that's the worst thing in the world is to have to go back to being a sort of pre-agriculture hunter-gatherer instead of having this sort of accessibility to nourished, really good food that we have in our supermarkets and everywhere. So, why are fossil fuels important for agriculture, and how can they help protect us? How can they help us protect nature?
It's a number of things, and people don't understand the energy is the basis of really everything. It is the premise of our existence as a species, and so in short, or there's energy. Abundant and low cost energy produces abundant and low cost steel. You need steel farm equipment to create energy efficiently. You and I know from Canada, these efficient farmers, they're using combines, they're using all of this is steel, tractors, it's steel. In comparison, in Africa, where they can't afford it. They just can't
Yeah,
afford. And so anything that is going to increase the cost of steel is ripping farm tools and equipment out of the hands of those who are at the margin of being able to afford it. So that's the one element. The other element is fossil fuels are more than energy. They're feedstock. So these molecules, we use them to make a lot of things. All of our synthetic products, plastics, and so forth. But the most important product that is made through the transformations of hydrocarbons is fertilizer. So without fertilizer, half of the world population would not have food. So
yeah,
you're talking about killing. That's the stark reality. You are talking about killing. Um, half the world's population if they do not have fertilizer. So this is another means of that fossil fuels uh, create um, efficient agricultural yields. And then thirdly is the most obvious. That is, okay, great. Now we can afford our tractor. We can afford our combine. We can get out there and do some efficient farming. We need that efficient energy, and diesel is the way that provides that affordable, abundant energy. And those are the it's really that simple. And if you're in Tanzania right now and you are not far off starving and in complete abject poverty, those are the three ingredients you as a farmer don't have to create food efficiently. And as a result of that, you are not going to have a prosperous country. 0% chance. I mean, from the beginning of our origins as as a civilized people, it's always been farming that has provided that bedrock, of prosperity, and that will not change. And so you're without those three ingredients, all provided by fossil fuels, you are condemning those in that all of the, that all of those developing countries to abject poverty. And you
Yeah.
see hunger rising. You see access to electricity, globally going down for the first time in decades. You see all of these human migrations. It's all related to this deceitful energy transition that the West has imposed on these developing countries. And related to that, you look at from a wildlife perspective, you look at the encroachment you've got your national parks, you've got all of this pressure around them. Why? Because people need land. They are all farming this land. They're taking it from the elephants. So, and that's what's causing the devastation of wildlife in Africa and everywhere else. And so it's positively, the fix is so simple: efficient farming. Everything related to when you're weighing up any decisions related to energy, what you can do to make the world better or worse, you've just got to consider how that's going to impact, farming. And I would say positively, you look at where we're from, um, and you see in the last 100 years, the efficiency, gains in farming has just been
It's
unbelievable.
phenomenal.
It's
Yeah.
phenomenal. We used to be agricultural in everywhere. 100 years ago, that's what most people did to support their societies. Today, USA is so efficient in farming. Canada too. You don't need that many. They can do other things. They can create value in other ways, and also in over that same timeline, you look at our buffalo population is gone through the roof. Our buffalo were near extinct
Yeah.
100 years ago, and now Saskatchewan has got teams of them. You've got them all over the United States. It's like, wow, you've literally gone from zero to this is now a wildlife success story that you can hardly believe. Is it magic? No, it's efficient farming. We have land to give to the wildlife, and so and it's all based on, fossil fuels foundationally, cheap farm equipment, affordable equipment, affordable and abundant fertilizer, affordable and abundant energy. So it's ingredients that can be spread around the world very easily. And in actual fact, all we have to do is nothing. What we have to stop doing is impeding the hand of the free market. It's regulations that we are against fossil fuels. We are against coal use in developing countries. The West is going into these places saying you can have your World Bank loan, but you've got to shut in your coal plant.
Yeah.
These
You
countries,
can
they are,
leapfrog us. You can leapfrog us and
yes,
and
yeah.
build solar and wind or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. So they're imposing this on the world. And then as soon as things get a little bit, there's a little bit of a wrinkle over in Europe. Oh, fossil fuels, please, please. The very thing that they denied the people in the developing world. So it's just blatant. It is just criminal. It is absolutely enough. People
It's
are suffering.
immoral. It's
It's
actually
completely
immoral.
immoral. It's
Yeah.
it's 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 feigned goodwill and compassion. It's just all of the classic elements of a fraud.
Well,
It-
the other element there is that if you have higher yields, that means you need less farmland, and
yeah,
therefore there's more wilderness available because, if you can increase the yield in one particular field, then you don't need to. And if you're trying to compete, compare that with organic farming, you would
yes.
have to probably use 3 or 4 times the amount of space in order to get a similar yield from an organic production. And so therefore we by being more efficient, then there's more habitat left for wilderness.
100%. So it's actually like mathematical, and it's so you look at how much how how many tons of rice will be produced by a certain area of land, and then you figure out how many tons of rice you need, and then you go, okay, this is the amount of land we need for rice. Same thing for wheat, same thing for any other agricultural commodity. And this is the real substance pursuant to which 8.2 billion people can survive.
That's right.
Wealthy people, half the world's population is living on less than $7 a day. If the wealthy people of the world want to do it, oh, I feel really good about this organic, fine. But you cannot in the back in the real world, where the vast bulk of human and what really bothers me is that this has been completely ignored. When we talk about the energy transition, we're always talking about us, the rich, the wealthy countries, and we're ignoring that over 750 million people don't even have access to electricity. We are,
Yeah.
and by we, I'm talking about the United Nations. I'm talking about the International Energy Agency. Like, guys, your job is to defend these people. I mean,
That's right.
it's just so wrong. But back to agricultural yields. Yes, it's really that simple. If you double your agricultural yield, to get that rice, to get that wheat, bang, all of a sudden you need half as much land.
Yeah.
Well, great. That's land for your wildlife. And so if you've got all of this, they use wildlife to, we love the people promoting the climate agenda. We love wildlife, and so do it. Do green energy, and forget about fossil fuels. And this is exactly what is going to decimate wildlife, because it's stripping them of their land.
Yeah.
So because we're going to get the food we need. That pressure is relentless. And if we need to take more land, oh goodness, we will. You cannot stop the forces of the agricultural revolution. These forces have been our a basic survival mechanism since we began farming. When people are poor, when people are broke, when people are hungry, they go and they farm more land,
Yeah.
to provide for themselves, their communities. That's the way it works. So you can put up as many fences as you want around these protected habitat areas. It is completely futile, as we're finding
Yeah.
out. This is why the animal populations of Africa are being decimated. If you give these people a chance and just let them get on with it and stop impeding their access to coal, natural gas, and oil and oil products, they're going to be up and away. It's a
Yeah.
win across the board. It's they're it's the positive news. You get all of this with one, fossil fuels, free markets. They give you. I'm absolutely astounded because we people in economics, we often think about the Adam Smith's free hand, and it's by pursuing capitalistic instincts, pursuing profit and efficiency and all of these things, you embetter yourself. But you also, according to Adam Smith and according to the lessons of history over the last several centuries, you also embetter humankind, and your broader community. And what I've also just would come to my realization in looking into in researching my book is it's the exact same for wilderness.
Yeah.
it is the capitalism is the best friend of our Canadian and American buffaloes, and the inverse of that, the totalitarian imposition of energy controls and on Africa, that is devastating. Their wilderness. So and it really bothers me that you see these people who ostensibly love wilderness and who are, out there promoting an anti CO2 agenda, which is just, you love gorillas, but you're promoting an anti CO2 agenda, which is going to greatly reduce the amount of land available for gorillas to live. It's just, it is beyond deceitful. It's just, I'm very pleased that this is coming to an end.
Yeah,
It's
for
tragic that
sure.
it took us this far, and it's tragic that our suffering and the suffering of global wildlife has been. You look at the land taken from, the rainforest to, for
For
palm.
COP30, where they did you see that? Where they, cut down a whole bunch of trees in order to make a four-lane highway so that the delegates can go through the rainforest to where they built the facility?
It's unbelievable. Well, it's the fraud and deceit. But the thing is, if you control your population's mind, you can tell them anything. You can
Yeah,
tell them that as they're getting poorer, oh, don't worry, green energy is an opportunity.
yeah.
Here's the graph that says your life is better, and it's like, well, I'm going to a food bank. It doesn't really add up, but that's what gaslighting is.
And you're
And
supposed to take the sacrifice. You're supposed to be,
yes,
sacrificing for the greater good of the planet.
well, there's that, but to be fair, they even sell it as an opportunity. I mean, if you talk to
Right.
people in the U,
Yeah.
because guess what? I mean, uh, Joe Biden, he's saying wind energy is, and same with Ed Miliband, it's cheaper and better than fossil fuels.
Which is
Okay,
just not true.
it's a complete disgraceful lie.
Yeah.
But if you've got a media ecosystem that will, and certain pockets of the world have that, where you can tell your population that that's the case, and the same for what, wilderness. You can tell them that this is good, for wilderness, as you wilderness, is pushed off the face of the earth. Um, that's just the yeah, how it's been going for some time, sadly.
Sadly. Well, we're running near the end of our time here, and I wondered if you have any final thoughts. If there's one takeaway you want readers to have from energy shocks, what would it be?
I would say, one technical thing, and then another. We exhale 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide per day, and so this whole anti-carbon dioxide agenda, we have to put it in that frame, and the carbon dioxide that we exhale is not natural. It's back to the fertilizer in our food. It's back to the way that we produce our food, all of which is fossil fuel intensive. So when we start having an anti CO2 agenda, be very worried. And then the other key point that I was is that there are forces at play, that there is a fight, but for me, the big takeaway I found absolutely surprising, and I didn't go into the book with this objective, but for me, the big takeaway is, wow, there are forces at play. There are spiritual forces at play, which is, my background is logic, engineering, economics. But when I started looking at what they're really getting at here, in the promotion of the energy transition and the climate fear agenda, do not care at all about the success of this agenda, and there is no success and they don't, that's not what they're playing for. They are progressing. They're progressing an agenda to change our belief systems, our values, and what has made Western civilization what it is. And so just an awareness of, wow, that fight's taking place. It's game on, whether you want to recognize it or not. It is definitely happening, and they have been winning in large part, and they, the people promoting the climate fear agenda, the energy transition agenda, they've been winning in large part because we have lacked an awareness that that game is actually being played, and that's the, the real motivation. So that's what I would like people to contemplate or take away. I don't spend much time on the book on that topic. It's really just a small little um, gem or takeaway, but it's an important one.
I think you're right. I think more research needs to be done on that area. Is this whole shift in a sort of religious sense where you had the role of the Catholic Church with Laudato Si, which Pope Francis had commissioned. I think it was back in 2014, 2015, maybe a little bit later. And then, of course, the Church of England has gone full climate, and
Yeah,
the former Archbishop Justin, was it Justin Welby, had
yeah.
made those ridiculous statements that you're not a Christian if you don't believe that there's a climate catastrophe.
I'm so
And
glad you said that. Yes, I agree.
yeah,
It is
and I
unbelievable.
see that in the churches here, like in our little village church, they're being sort of encouraged to become an eco church. And it's like, well, if you bring eco into church, then you're no longer church. You're now worshiping Gaia. You're not worshiping God. And
Yes, 100%.
so yeah, you're right. I think more needs to be done on that spiritual component. Maybe that's your next book.
Well, possibly. Yeah, it's something for all of us to discover. And for our American Canadian viewers, beware, because that's the real play, and we see it very, very in your face living in the UK, where the what the church of what it was has been gutted in its essence and entirety to promote a predatory green energy agenda, which is just like, I don't, even if you're not religious, you've got to be very concerned by the creation of a new religion
That's
within.
fundamentally anti-human.
Yes, exactly, and to do it kind of in the traitorous way of from within an existing belief system or church is, I mean, the doctrine that God is green, of the Church of England is just, beware.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
it's in okay. Now they're on. You think of the false prophets, and we are told, Judge them by their fruits." Look at the fruits of these prophets: chaos, hunger, uh, you know, it's energy, insecurity. All of this is financial precarity. People going to not having the means to get by without food banks.
Yeah.
The destruction of wildlife, and the ostensible gains such as reduced carbon dioxide. It's complete nonsense and fraudulent. That's not happening. The real fruits of this are would all suggest that these are false prophets and liars, and that they have no business being in any religion, and it's a false religion. It's terribly deceitful. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's probably the most one of the most probably the most important takeaway. Although in the book itself, I don't spend too much time on that. It's mostly about energy and science.
That's right. And all these things kind of work together, and that's another avenue of research down the road. Um,
Yeah.
so thank you so much for your time. I'm just going to hold the book up again,
Oh, bless you.
Energy
Thank you.
Shocks, which is really amazing. In the description, there will be links to the book website and the Amazon for you can buy the book yourself. And yeah, thank you so much, Brendan, for this conversation and talking about your book, Energy Shocks. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for your encouragement, Tammy. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.